Hi, my name is Mattia Murray, and welcome to The Longer Road. You are on the longer road if you have multiple intersectional identities that are often marginalized. You've had to work harder to get to the starting line, and you might feel behind. I'm here to provide hope, support, and practical tips, and to let you know that you're not alone. Today I'm talking a little bit about New Year's resolutions versus goals versus what I think of as self-trust. So one of my biggest goals last year, or intentions maybe is a better word, was to learn how to increase trust with myself. I think it's a very common neurodivergent feeling or trait to kind of feel like we've broken trust with ourselves over and over, and therefore it can be hard to figure out how to develop that. So that was one of my intentions last year, and it actually worked really well. One of the things I did was I put a question on a Post-it note on my wall for decision-making that said, will this increase self-trust? And one of the things I really noticed is one of the ways I have increased self-trust myself is around decision-making, because I only make a decision when I mean it. And I'm going to talk about what I mean about that. So, for example, I think a New Year's resolution, for the most part, is more of a dream or a hope rather than, for most people, rather than a really well thought out goal. And when I started thinking from the perspective of self-trust, I knew that just saying randomly at the beginning of a year, which is pretty arbitrary, that I was going to totally change my behavior. By the way, at a time of year when my brain is maybe needing a bit more rest. I definitely feel the hibernation and rest urges in the winter when it's cold. Pretty much without exception over the years, when I've set a New Year's resolution, I knew I wasn't really intending to keep it, or at least I wasn't going to make myself miserable in order to keep it. So as soon as it started to become really uncomfortable, or when I felt like I was failing repeatedly, I would just stop. And that's fine, by the way. A goal, if you go about, traditional goal setting techniques, which again, sometimes work for my brain, sometimes don't. They're, at least if you're really thinking about and planning ahead for obstacles, that can be really useful. And like I was saying at the beginning, I won't even set a goal or an intention unless I'm really planning on doing everything I can to meet it. And by the way, that does not mean that I set a bunch of goals and then run full tilt at a bunch of goals. It means I actually set fewer goals most of the time. And for my brain, that's actually been really useful to go through a period of a couple of years where I intentionally set fewer goals, had fewer deadlines. It's funny because 2 years ago, I still had a really packed year in a lot of ways. But there were things that I would have tried to get myself to do that I was just like, you know what? To be realistic, there's too much on my plate for me to be able to focus on this other thing. And especially as I started to work with noticing how much task switching affects me, switching between totally different types of thinking or work or even just locations and settings, that sometimes takes extra effort for me, and it is work in itself. So, for example, I was not going to be as effective. I was not as effective when I was writing in the morning, coaching in the late morning and afternoon, and teaching music in the late afternoon, early evening. Having basically 3 jobs, back to back, 3 totally different types of tasks. And when I switched over to, for the most part, doing one type of work in a day, it freed up so much space, and certain habits and goals suddenly became much easier. And the biggest impact that self-trust has had for me is that it's actually made it much, much easier to rest and to enjoy the rest that I'm taking, which has always been a struggle for me my whole life. But now, for example, if I set myself one task in a day and I know it's a difficult task for me and I know it's going to take a lot of space, I used to try to make myself do that in the morning because, that's the traditional advice. Okay, start with the hardest, or it's a form of traditional advice. Start with the hardest thing and do it as quickly or as soon as you can in the day. And then you feel good. Yes, that's how maybe dopamine pathworks work for a neurotypical brain. For my brain, I actually need, typically, if I have a really emotionally and intellectually challenging task, I will spend the morning with myself doing things that nourish me and make me feel good. And I mean, I'm thinking of one day in particular where I didn't get to that task until 7 p.m. But because I trusted that I would do it, I actually enjoyed my entire day. I did not feel like the task was looming over me. I believed I was going to be able to do it. And I knew that what I was doing was giving my brain and body the fuel that it needed to be able to get into this creative enjoyment space where then I could sit down and actually bang out the whole thing in an hour and a half at a time when my brain felt really good. And that has been just incredibly impactful on my ability to enjoy my life. And part of the reason I'm bringing this to you at the very beginning of 2023 is that I actually do have a big intention for myself this year that is a bit more goal oriented, let's say, because it's an actual thing that I can do or not do. And while there are a lot of steps in it, ultimately this is more of a binary yes or no, I will have done this thing, not, developing self-trust, which is this huge nebulous thing. My goal this year is to get a driver's license. I'm 35. I've always lived in cities with good public transportation, and I did have a permit for many years. I technically learned how to drive, but my early experiences with driving were actually quite traumatic. For example, my first time I ever drove, I got into this car with my mom, and I had gotten my permit in the state of Washington by just taking a test. So I had never driven or sat in the driver's seat of a car ever. I asked my mom which one's the gas and which one's the brake, and she thought I was joking, so she refused to tell me the answer. So I just had a fucking terrible time trying to drive for like 2 blocks with her screaming the whole way, and then she finally, got out and drove herself. And then my other main experience driving was driving our family's 12-passenger van with very bad or mostly broken power steering, which was really, really hard. So I never learned how to drive in a non-dramatic way. And this last September, when my partner almost died in a cycling accident, there was a moment where we were at home and I was calling a Lyft to come pick us up, a car to come pick us up to take us to the emergency room. And my partner was like, yeah, I don't remember exactly what they said, but something like, this is the moment where it'd be great if you could drive. And there was one other incident last year where I would have been able to go to my best friend's wedding, and I ended up not being able to because my partner wasn't able to come, and there was no other good way for me to get there besides driving. And between those two things, I was like, okay, I'm finally feeling the pain of not having a license, even though most of the time it doesn't matter. And I'm genuinely terrified about driving. I have a lot of phobias around driving. I know a lot of factual information about the terrors of road accidents. I also don't know how many car accidents I've been in. I've been in a lot of car accidents because my parents are angry, terrible drivers. So all of this is to say, I'm planning on being open on the podcast about this process for me. And at this moment, other than setting this intention to get a driver's license before the end of this year, 2023, other than that, I haven't made a plan around it. I haven't done any sort of traditional goal setting stuff around it. I know there will be a lot of steps, and that's part of what's difficult for my brain is just the executive function part of that, of actually figuring out what needs to happen and making it happen in order. And if you know me in real life, you are very welcome to ask me how this is going at some point this year, because either I'm just going to, gently work on it all year and kind of, ease myself into it, probably do self-hypnosis around it, or have one of my colleagues help me with the phobia side of it. I know things that work and that will help significantly. But just to kind of put this in the frame of what I'm talking about here, in every previous time in my life, when I looked at this as a potential goal, getting a license, for me, the difficulty and the fear and the annoyance very much outweighed what I might get out of it. Especially because, for example, I wasn't planning on buying a car when I was living in Boston. And now there's, my life circumstances have shifted. And even though all of those fears and concerns and annoyances are still there, I now have, every once in a while, a couple times a year, really important reasons to be able to drive. And my nesting partner does have a car, so I have access. So I'm sharing all of this with you, partly because I'm planning on sharing this process with you as it happens. Also because I just want to say at the beginning of the year, when people are either saying, yay, resolutions, or I hate resolutions, New Year's resolutions, or whatever way works for you to feel better and achieve what you want to achieve. I don't even love the word achieve, but get what you want, move toward what you want, make progress. Any way that works for you is totally valid. And if you find moments in the Gregorian calendar very inspiring, awesome. If you want to develop self-trust, awesome. And if that's an interesting topic to you, feel free to reach out to me and I can make a longer episode about how I developed that self-trust and ways that I've seen it work for other people as well. But in the meantime, I just wanted to briefly say happy holidays, happy New Year, and whatever you're working on, whatever you want, I'm sending all my love and all my support to you. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll talk to you next week. Thanks for listening. If you know someone who would be helped by this podcast, please share it with them. And I'd love to hear your thoughts and suggestions at mattia@mattiamurray.com. That's MATTIA at MATTIAMAUREE.com. Thank you.